This week's show brought to you by the Dallas Cowboys, the Detroit Lions of the Southwest. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Andres Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, and this week we have some very special guests. So if you've been under a rock and haven't been paying attention to my Twitter feed, there has been an amazing new website that launched in the last 2 weeks called the ladiesleague.org, and we are lucky enough to have special guest head editor of the ladiesleague.org, sorry about that, Molly Cosby on the show. Molly, welcome.
Woohoo! Thank you for having me. My honor.
Uh, And then, of course, those of you will also recognize, if you're watching this live, Dave Barry of the Wages of Wins. But really, Dave, you're kind of like, you're the ride. Like, you have an office where, because you're both at Southern Utah University. So you were kind enough to provide an office, and Molly was kind enough to let you stay in the office while we recorded.
That's pretty much what's happening here, yes.
So I've got to ask, being just this will be the most focus I give you, Dave. Being a tenured professor and a decade-long blogger, how does it feel to know that after like a decade of doing it, basically you're relegated to, I provide an office for other people to do podcasts?
You know, that's really what I was dreaming of when I started. That's really what I was going for. So I think I've achieved my dream.
Awesome. All right. So Molly, the ladiesleague.org, this is, I'll be honest, on this site, we try and talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. And I do my best for, basically covering, the Hispanic population of the United States, all of it on my own. But, one of the things we talk about a lot is women in sports. And Patrick, our other co-host, always brings up, well, we're a bunch of guys talking about it. So I cannot express how excited I was to see the ladiesleague.org come up, because it's women's sports written by women for women. It's amazing. So how did that all come about?
Well, thank you. First off, I'm glad you guys are so excited about it. But we honestly just wanted to, like you said, provide a site for women by women. When he kind of had the idea, I originally thought, well, I mean, what makes us different? Isn't there stuff out there like this? Why would anybody want to hear us online next to all the other voices? And then a number was presented to me, and it was 10% of women sports fans only report about it or write about it. So only 10% of them are actually saying something about what they're passionate about. And so the creation of this site kind of brought together women who love sports, watch sports, play sports, work in sports. It gives them an outlet to just kind of be able to say what they love about it, report what they're feeling, their stories, stats, anything like that. And so it started out with me, and then we kind of grew into a few more writers, and now it has expanded from little old Cedar City, Utah, to include a few more writers from all over the country. So it's been a pretty exciting and quick start.
Yeah, I was wicked impressed because, I saw the original thing go out, and then Dave emailed and said, Dave doesn't realize how up on the times I'm in the internet. So I saw all the tweets about it ahead of time. And then he emailed and said, did you know this exists? And I was like, yeah, I already tweeted about it. But then you've been churning out content like mad really, really quick. And what you just said that really amazes me is the breadth of it. So it's not just like the Boxscore Geeks, we're a bunch of stat nerds that all write, here's what my Excel spreadsheet said about sports this week. Patrick was a coach, so he does add a little perspective. But I think you've had like, what does an athletic trainer do? You had a kicker, like what's it like to actually be a football kicker, both, just a kicker as itself and then as female. And so that's the other huge thing that's impressed me, is that it's not just one type, it's a lot of different experiences.
Oh, yeah, I'd be lying if I said that I knew this is how it was going to be whenever we thought about it. I originally just thought this was a site where people are just going to kind of come together. Women were just going to comment on whatever they saw going on. But yeah, like you said, stuff has been coming out so rapidly. I had no idea that these women would be this passionate about it. Couldn't ask for any better than that. But one of my favorites was actually the story that you mentioned, Allie writing about how she was a football kicker on a football team, a woman being on the team. That was fascinating to me. She did a great job telling that story. But yeah, the diversity between the women being able to say, okay, I've actually played sports with men, right alongside them, versus stories about, okay, this was my experience whenever I saw this interview like Lindsay did with the ESPN interview, or stories about just what it's like to be a woman sports fan.
And yeah, we'll make sure you get another plug for this at the end of the show. But on your site, you actually say, if you want to work with us, here's how. So if anybody is listening to this and wants to get involved with the ladiesleague.org, what do they need to do?
Yeah, so we're open to any new talent. If anybody wants to join us, we are more than happy to have them. Go to our contact section on our website, and it allows you to kind of tell us your name, send us a little message about, hey, I want to be a full-time writer, or I just want to guest write. So maybe you have an article that you want to write about one specific thing or a couple, or maybe you want to be interviewed, or if you have someone that you want us to interview. I mean, really anything that you would want on our site, you can go to that contact tab and contact us.
And yeah, that's theladiesleague.org. And I believe you can just do /contact on that. I just tried that myself, just verify it. So yeah, that is definitely awesome. This is kind of a weird question to ask since we're going to record and then put this up tomorrow, but any spoilers or teasers on any content coming up in the near future?
Yes, we are actually in the process. There's a new article that I'm currently editing from one of our guest writers, and she is going to tackle the topic of what it's like to be a woman in the gym. So she'll kind of take on her perspective of that. And then I'm sure we've got so much more content coming through from one of our writers, Amanda. Her baseball season has just kicked off, and so she's really passionate about that. So
that is awesome. And yeah, so if this goes out, if that's already up, fantastic. If not, you can check it out.
Dre, if I can throw out one more.
What do we got?
We got an article going up probably, would it be later today?
Yeah,
later today. This is going to be an article that I think Boxscore Geek fans especially will like. It deals with sports economics research and the black quarterback. So Tiffany Greer is going to talk about 3 or 4 different studies and actually talk about how Cam Newton is the story of Cam Newton told by the sports economics research, which does indicate indeed that race plays a role in how quarterbacks are evaluated. So she actually goes through and reviews that research.
That is awesome, and I'm glad that you know our audience well enough to say that. You're like, something your audience is going to enjoy, sports economics. How many places are you able to say that?
Virtually none.
Brian and I in a show last week, we were discussing the Orlando Magic, and neither of us could name the mascot, but Brian could, off the top of his head, name an article on sports science research. So that is awesome. One just quick thing I want to throw out, Patrick Minton, the creator of our site, he's a Seattle Storm season ticket holder now. We're huge fans now that we've got Jenny Busek on the show. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And then, of course, the Seattle Storm have the #1 pick in the upcoming draft. And I looked at some college numbers from Dave, and they look good. So just 2 requests of the site. More Storm content if you can get it. And then if there's any collegiate data for women's basketball, that would be awesome as well.
Well, we started, so Taylor Sella is our webmaster. And so we have WNBA data for every single team. The entire history of the WNBA is online. You can see all their wins produced data. I do have college women's data back 3 years, and we were thinking of putting that online. But there's 350 teams in a year, and Taylor pointed out that that's extremely labor intensive to get all of that posted someplace. So our dream is to someday put that out there, but it may take a while to get it there.
And I'll hijack this to talk about the Boxscore Geeks briefly. I just did a big data update. You may or may not care, Dave, about positions on our site, and that took a lot of time. So I totally feel that. Actually, and now we're going to get back to the main show. Molly, we were talking this pre-show, and this is kind of awesome. You're from Texas. I've got a lot of family out there, though, as we discussed pre-show. Texas is a country in its own. That doesn't mean much.
Proud of it.
But we were going to talk about Texas teams that you're a fan of. You said not so much NBA or even the Rockets, but you said you are a Dallas Cowboys fan.
I am. I hail from Texas, East Texas, and so Dallas Cowboys and Dallas Mavericks are kind of the teams that I grew up with. I unfortunately did not have a choice. I kind of grew up with the Dallas baby bottle in my mouth because my parents and their cousins and their family are all drinking the same Kool-Aid. So after my mom got to go have dinner with Troy Aikman one night. I mean, it's been Dallas ever since I've been born. So unfortunately, I have not been able to see a Super Bowl win yet. But you know, once they do get one, then I can say that I'm not a bandwagon fan. I have faithfully and dutifully gone through all of that pain years after year. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, I totally feel that because I grew up in Denver, Colorado, which Broncos, same thing. You grow up there, you're either a Broncos fan or a hipster that hates the Broncos. And then I've chosen to move. I'm about 2 hours out of Green Bay, so same exact thing. You can't. I've now lived in 2 states where you are a fan of the team or you're just ostracized.
I find it interesting because if you're older, you think of the Cowboys as a perennial winner, right? Because they were in the 70s and 80s and 60s.
90s, early 90s.
Early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s.
Talking to Molly, she talks a lot about how she suffers as a Cowboys fan. And I thought that was so odd when she told me that the first time. And then I thought about it. I said, really, her experience in her life is the same experience I have with the Lions. They just don't win. And they always mess up. And that's really what the Cowboys are, the Lions, essentially, under Jerry Jones.
And there is some content, you're asking about future content. There will be plenty of Cowboys articles, what it's like to be a Cowboys fan, my take on Jerry Jones coming up soon. So
I'll say, Molly, if you're a fan of a bad team, especially in football, there's no better friend to have than Dave, as I'm sure you know, as he just explains the randomness of sports and how it doesn't matter, and then also how it doesn't even matter for making money, as I'm sure Jerry Jones knows, doesn't need to win to put on a money-making team. So
clearly not.
And then I will say you were actually kind of nice pre-show. You didn't really bash Romo that much, I don't know if that qualifies you as a good or a bad Cowboys fan.
I call my relationship with the Cowboys an abusive relationship, just because you get that hope at the beginning of the season, and then Romo blows out his shoulder, and then you get injury after injury. Des Bryant's out, and then you still stick with him no matter how bad they hurt you. You still end up sticking with them. So I don't bash Romo just because he's been through so many injuries, and yet he's still sticking with us. Statistically, best fourth quarter quarterback. But that might be because he gets himself into the biggest hole in the beginning of the game. But yeah, I'm not going to bash him yet. We need something. We just need help, whether it be Jerry Jones getting out of there or something.
That was essentially the John Elway story before he won Super Bowls at the very end, is that he was always winning in the fourth quarter. And Dre should know this as a Broncos fan, that there was a reason why John Elway had a lot of fourth quarter comebacks.
Well, they were, yeah. And actually, that's what's interesting for me. My time is I watched John Elway at the end of his career, so it was really more the Terrell Davis show. And then now this made me happy, Dave, because at the Wages of Wins and Boxscore Geeks, we're always told that we overvalue defense. The thing that won the Broncos the Super Bowl this year was defense, and the thing that cost them the Super Bowl, against the Seattle Seahawks a few years back was defense. So, I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, you stole my boy Ware. I still want him back.
Yeah, we got Von. I'm just all about Von Miller, and actually,
I love Von. Yeah, Texas A&M boy. I agree.
Oh, I didn't. Yeah. So this is. I want to get into. I'm checking time. Apologize about that because I have to go right at 2:50 my time. But you've had some really great articles that are going to kind of talk about where we were just at, which is these ideas of being a true sports fan and how much you know. So if you talk to me about basketball, and Dave knows this, and Dave and me, we do trivia offs a lot where it's like, I'll know teams back to certain years and salaries and advanced stats and whatever. And then if you ask me about football, I know, I usually know the quarterback, and I usually know the one or two stars on each team. And, I know which teams are kind of good and which teams are kind of bad, but I'm not a fantastic a fantastic football fan. And in fact, if you watch a game with me, I have lots of friends who are better than me, and I'll ask them questions like, why did they just do that here? And you've had a lot of fantastic articles on this kind of weird being a true sports fan and then the double standard that women kind of go through for it. And I mean, back and forth just there. You clearly know more about football than I do. I know the bare minimum. I know you want to get the ball across that line. But I've really enjoyed those articles because it is an interesting thing to see where you see people get put down for not being true sports fan, and then it happens primarily to women.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I wanted to be really careful with this site. I went noted that in our about section for the site. I don't want it to be a place for women to come to whine because that's not what this site is for. It's just for us to be able to speak our opinions. But with that article, my first one about being quizzed as a woman, it is true. It happens so many times. And at first I just kind of accepted it and I thought, okay, well, this is what it's going to be like to be able to play with the big boys, I guess, if you want to be a fan. And then I realized it should not actually be like this. There should be no quizzes, nothing. You should just be able to say, yes, I like this team, or yes, I'm a fan of this sport. Great. Okay. That's it. There's nothing else to follow up after that.
Oh, and I mean, even Dave and I go back and forth on this. I'm a huge fair weather fan, so to speak, even for big places. So, I didn't watch as much Broncos the last couple of seasons, but then when they were going on their playoff run this year, I went to Buffalo Wild Wings every Sunday to watch them play. So it's kind of one of those, I don't think there's a problem in sports of just saying, hey, they're doing well in a bunch, there are a bunch of Super Bowl parties or a bunch of playoff parties or whatever happening, or there's a March Madness bracket. I just want to hang out with my friends and do this fun event. And there shouldn't be it's not school. We shouldn't have to take a class before
Agreed.
getting an excuse to cheer for the Broncos or whatever.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's an excellent point. There shouldn't be any quiz, whether it be for men or women, at any point whatsoever. So yeah, you're right.
And this gets me in a weird territory because what you said your kind of goal of the site is not to just be about whining. And I feel there's a fine line and you're doing a good job of it, because what I would say is what you're noticing, I've noticed too, the weird double standard, and the great story you tell in Faking the O is you were at a football. I think you were watching a football game, and someone, it was a female in this case, but she said something like they should kick a field goal, and she said that on the extra point. And
yeah. So the main reason for writing this article was because I wanted to defend the men's side, actually. Just because I don't want, with my first article, I hope it wasn't whining. I didn't want it to come across as whining. It was more of kind of just explaining what it's like to be a female fan. And then with this second follow-up article, I wanted to kind of take the guy side of why they feel it's necessary to quiz women. And then my brilliant editor, who's actually sitting beside me, kind of threw in the fact that, it's not just women that fake it, it's guys too. And so we threw in that aspect of it as well. And so I just kind of wanted to point out why quizzing kind of happens to begin with, is just because there's people who do fake it. And so quizzing happens just so that people can qualify someone's fandom somewhere like that.
But it's terrifically one-sided because we only quiz the women, and
Yeah.
men are faking it a lot. This is something that happens at every sporting event. I told Molly this story. We were at a baseball game, and you met Rob Simmons, right, Gray? So he's a sports economist in England who's done a lot on base. He's actually done a lot of work on baseball, knows quite a bit about baseball. So Rob and I were sitting there at a baseball game watching, and we know a lot about baseball. There was a guy behind us talking to his girlfriend, explaining the game to her, and he was totally wrong. Mm-hmm. And he was very emphatic about it. And so he was faking it. Now, if he was a woman, we would turn around and start giving him a quiz, which he undoubtedly would have failed because he didn't actually know anything. But we did not do that because people don't do that to men, and I guess the point is don't do that to women either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing that I wanted to say, and it seems like you're actually doing a fine line between whining and not, is at least pointing it out, and you're doing a good mix of every article isn't here's an example of men or sexism in sports, but like the Tabitha Davidson post, and I think you said that was by, help me with the name, it was Lindsay. Sorry, say that one more time.
Lindsay Darvin, she's a sport management PhD candidate, University of Florida.
Awesome. And so all I was going to say there is that's a good example of saying we notice something weird here and we just want to call attention to it. And I think that's like and what you're saying with the sports quiz is the same thing, is it is saying, hey, if you're going to go to a party and you're probably going to be, if you're going to go to a party for any given sporting event, basketball, football, baseball, whatever, there are going to be a good number of people at that party that don't know what they're talking about. And hey, maybe you don't need to go up to them and say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. Maybe they're just here for the wings and the camaraderie.
Yeah, and I liked what you mentioned earlier about your experience, about how you were asking questions. That's completely different than this guy at the baseball game who is pretending like he knows it. So that's why the faking the O article happened.
But I do feel, I mean, I've definitely seen this in my own experience. It's like it's perfectly acceptable if you're a guy from any age to just kind of pretend you know what you're talking about when it comes to sports. And you know that I think there is a lot of differences. Think a book I've recommended to you, Dave, and I'd be curious if you've read it, Molly. It's called Delusions of Gender, and it talks a lot about the difference in just upbringing. And like I'll just say, I can't speak as a woman, but I can speak as a man. It's my entire life, I have never once been called on saying anything about sports, and of course, did little league and stuff. And I know for a fact I didn't know what I was talking about for most of my life. Probably still don't.
That is very true. Men do not get called on these things. Men learn very early on in life that if you say something emphatically, people are going to believe you. I mean, that's essentially the Donald Trump presidency, isn't it? He
Wow,
says it emphatically, and people go, "Oh, that must be right." And he learned that lesson very early in life, and women don't get that. They don't get to do the same thing.
So we kind of talked this at the top of the show, Molly, but it was one of the more depressing things to hear is just the amount of coverage that women's sports get. And I believe you have one article on the site so far on this, or am I mistaken? Or I think it might be in the about where it's just the amount of coverage that female sports, women's sports gets in comparison, despite, the takeoff of so many of them.
Right, yeah. So that's in our About page. It gives you the numbers of how many women are fans of what sport. And then that's one of the reasons why we started the site was because that 10% number. That 10% is the women who are actually reporting or saying something about the sports. It's 10% of women who love sports. And so we just kind of wanted to bump that number up and give women a chance to talk about it. And then there's also a great article on the site about Moni Davis. If you hype it up, then they will watch. It's a great article about how Moni Davis, the girl who is the Little League pitcher, about since they hyped her up, people were able to watch her since she had more exposure.
And I think I'm trying to recall if it's Jessica Luther. This is a very popular kind of counter argument I've heard lately. And Moni Davis, I think, qualifies in all aspects. Is anybody that says, I don't watch the WNBA because it's just not as exciting as the NBA, or I don't watch this because it's not as exciting as that. Little League Baseball is a great example of just saying we can put anything on ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN8. And if we give it enough, if we give it enough hype, people will watch it. So it's kind of a ridiculous standard to say no one's interested in women's sports. And one of the anecdotes from Patrick Mitten on the site is he and his wife were going to a Seattle Storm game. Before the game, she just wanted to buy a T-shirt. They live in Seattle. You should be able to go to downtown Seattle and find a Seattle Storm T-shirt somewhere. And she couldn't. So you can kind of go, well, if you're not going to sell the merchandise, if you're not going to hype it, why are you then allowed to say no one's interested?
That was, and it was Jessica Luther that made that comment. So she said, this was in the summer, she made this comment that men will say they don't like the WNBA because they don't think the WNBA players are as good as NBA players. And then Jessica Luther said, but Little League Baseball players are nowhere near as good as Major League Baseball players. So why are you watching that? And if you're going to go by the standard, they have to be better than the pros. Then why are you watching college sports? And there actually was a writer who spent his life writing about college who chimed in by saying the same thing that she just said was wrong. And so, yeah, there are people who do that. And really, competition is competition. And so, if you like competition, then women's sports is all very competitive, and it's all very compelling for the same reason any sports is compelling.
I agree with that. All right. So this is one of the more interview shows we've done. So I actually sent out a list of questions. So I've gotten through what I've had to ask. So Molly, is there anything else you would like to say about the ladiesleague.org, any upcoming articles? We got about 10 minutes before I need to hop off. So floor is yours.
Oh, I'm just honored to be on this show with you guys. You guys have brought this website to light, which is just kind of what we want to do. We just want to get it out there and let women know that we're here. We have a voice now, especially with writers. If they want to write for us, interview, whatever, just to let them know that we are here. We're here for the women voice. We're not going to be anything exclusive or anything like that. So that's all I really had to add, is just to make sure that it's visible.
Can I point out how amazing the talent is?
I've got no complaints with that. I
So
mean,
Molly's not going to tell you this, but she's like a phenomenal writer. So we talked about what she said, but you should actually read the articles to see how she says it, because she's very clever in how she tells her stories. So her first article was on women being quizzed, and there's you could tell that story in different ways. You could just simply tell a story of her being quizzed, right? But she starts off talking, just imagine you are being taken through a security line and having men and women being asked different questions. That's a fairly clever way of introducing the story. And then she does a story about faking the O, which is, obviously that's a very clever way of framing that story. So that's one of the things that I've been impressed with is how well the women have written these stories. And this is a point Paul Shirley made, who's also been on Boxscore Geeks and stuff. He makes this point that, I think people have this idea that you need to go to a lot of schooling to be a writer. Paul Shirley just makes the point, and a lot of writers will say this: if you can write a sentence, you can write a story. And if you want to write something and you sit down and you think about it and you're impassioned to do this, you'll probably be pretty good at it.
I think I will say practice does help a lot. And I mean, what I'll point out, Molly, is if you look at when Dave recruited a lot of us that now write at Boxscore Geeks, you can look at our initial writing, and I will candidly say it's not as good as what is currently at theladiesleague.org. Hopefully we've gotten better over the years. If not, there are lots of NBA players. Andrea Bargnani has been practicing for years and is still the worst in the league. So that's where we're at. But yeah, I mean, I think if we wanted to spend the last 10 minutes, Dave and I could just literally heap praise on the site. And I will say the Faking the O article, I don't want to insult the rest of the site because you have some great authors, great talent, some great stories. That was my favorite story up to the point of when I sent out the questions, which was nice.
Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. We kind of feel like we're talking to ourselves if people aren't reading us, which is fine. We just want to be able to write. That's goal number one. But we are so thrilled that we're receiving the attention that we are. Let me brag on these women. I mean, we just kind of roped them in. We said, hey, you love sports. You have something to say. Please just say it. And they've been so dedicated. I mean, we mentioned earlier in the show about how frequent this content has been coming out. They have been really, really dedicated with their time, with their creativity of putting these articles out, of just kind of recognizing what's going on around them. And we've received attention that has really surprised me. I think we received a couple retweets, shout outs from ESPN anchors and things like that. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, we've had, yes. Yeah, it's and I would point out, Molly's the chief editor of this thing. So I approached Molly to get this started, but I don't write for the site and I don't do anything like that. I am totally in the background. Molly is very much in charge of what's going on. I'll tell you a story. Just last night, I asked Taylor, who Taylor's the one who actually physically posts everything. I said, are we ready to post this one story that was submitted? And Taylor's response was, well, has Molly approved it yet?
Awesome.
And I said, okay, well, we'll ask Molly if she's approved this. So, it is very much, and I emphasized to them, when we met, this is their show, it's their site. This is going to be what they say. And I'm here to offer advice, but that's it. And they're free to ignore me, which they have done.
We call him our coach. He's the one that came out and recruited all of us. And since his version of a perfect coach is basically just shutting up and sitting on the sideline, it's exactly what he's doing. He's kind of.
I was going to say. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, no.
More to the point, his research on coaches that they're largely useless. So
that's exactly right. Yeah, and I'm proving that.
He is the ladies' league coach then officially.
Yeah. So I'm the Greg Popovich of the site, and every once in a while I call him over and say, Molly, you're doing great.
I don't know if I'll give you Greg Popovich, maybe George Karl. Anyway,
George Karl doesn't. You've seen that Vine where Greg Popovich does that, right?
Oh, I have not.
Oh, you've not. Okay, this was not a couple weeks ago. Greg Popovich, in the middle of a game, he starts calling out to Tony Parker. He goes, Tony. And then Tony comes over and he looks at him and he goes, you're doing great. And that was it.
I'm definitely going to have to look that up now.
Yeah.
One last request, Molly, actually, because I was just thinking about this. You're talking about content. One person, because it seems like you're saying you got a lot of sway and pull, that I think would be amazing to write, interview, whatever for the site is Jessica Luther. I mean, we've already talked about her great point there. That would be an amazing one. If you haven't reached out to her yet, you should, because you make great content. She makes great content. That seems.
And right along with that, really fast, we are hopefully getting a new feature up on the site that's going to be called Ask a Lady, where anybody can write into us and say, hey, here's a person you should interview, or hey, what do you guys think about this topic? Or, for instance, let's take one of our specific authors and say, I want to hear what Rachel has to say about this because I like her writing, I like what she says, or anything like that. So hopefully it'll get our audience a little more involved with us and what they want to see from us.
As soon as that's up, I am promising I will definitely say, I'll probably just say Jessica Luther, ! A bunch of times. And
we can get her soon so we can get her interviewed for you.
That is awesome. All right. So the site, theladiesleague.org. If you're interested in writing for them, you can go to theladiesleague.org/contact. Chief editor, Molly Cosby, and help me out. I think it's, give me your Twitter handle, just so I don't get it wrong.
It's at Molly, MOLLY _TX for Texas.
Yes. All right. So that is perfect. Definitely do a follow. And then theladiesleague.org also has a Twitter handle. What is that? I'm logged out of Twitter. I failed on this. Apologies.
I believe it's at theladiesleague.org.
Awesome. So definitely follow the site. I think I proved last week I'm out of touch because I use RSS still, but add it to your RSS feed. A fantastic site. Thank you both so much for being on. This has been the Boxscore Geeks show. I'm not even going to do the long outro, Brian, because I want that to be the last part of the show. Theladiesleague.org. Just go there, check it out. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dre.
Yeah, thank you.